The click of Aaliyah's heels on the polished marble floor was a frantic staccato, a beat behind the panicked thrum of her own heart. Late. She was unforgivably, irrevocably late. The presentation files were clutched in a leather portfolio under her arm, the culmination of a month of sleepless nights for her entire team at the tech firm. And she, the administrative gatekeeper, was about to fail the final step, getting them to the 40th floor before the 9:30 meeting. The elevator bank was a gleaming wall of brushed steel. One set of doors was sliding shut with a silent, merciless finality. "Hold it, please." She didn't shout, but the plea was torn from her, sharp with desperation. She broke into a run, her black pencil skirt restricting her stride, her light pink silk blouse clinging to her back. She thrust her hand between the closing doors, a reckless, instinctive act. The rubber safety edge met her palm, and with a soft chime of protest, the doors slid back open. Aaliyah stumbled inside, breathless, clutching her portfolio to her chest. "Thank you, I'm so sorry," she gasped, turning to face her saviors. The words died in her throat. The air in the elevator was different. Colder, heavier. It was crowded, but the space felt vast and dangerous. 3 men stood inside, all dressed in dark, impeccably tailored suits that seemed to absorb the light. They were built like monuments to violence, their faces impassive, their stillness absolute. But it was the 4th man who held the room. He stood at the back, his presence a tangible force. He wasn't the largest, but the others orbited him like planets around a dead star. His suit was a shade of charcoal, so dark it was nearly black, the fabric draping over his broad shoulders with a kind of liquid perfection that cost more than her car. His hands were clasped loosely in front of him, long fingers bare of any jewelry. One thumb stroked the other, a slow, deliberate motion that was the only sign of life in his carved posture. And then her eyes met his. They were dark, so dark they seemed to hold no reflection, only depth. They weren't angry or annoyed. They were analytical, calculating. A thin, white scar cut through his left eyebrow, a flaw in the otherwise severe symmetry of his face. Aaliyah's apology withered. She felt a flush of heat crawl up her neck, a primal awareness of being prey. She quickly turned to face the doors, her back ramrod straight, focusing on the ascending floor numbers. 32. 33. She willed the elevator to move faster. The silence was a living thing, thick with unspoken meaning. Then, one of the men beside her spoke, his voice a low rumble in Korean. Aaliyah didn't understand the language, but the tone was deferential. He was reporting. The man at the back replied. His voice was deeper, a velvet rasp that slid under her skin. He only said a few words, but then he switched to flawless, unaccented English, the sound so unexpected it made her flinch. "The Cheongdam transfer is clean, but Park is a liability. Make sure his family understands the cost of disloyalty." Aaliyah's blood went cold. It wasn't the words themselves, though they were chilling enough. It was the delivery. It was calm, precise, like ordering a coffee. The cost of disloyalty. She could feel the weight of that phrase, the lives packed into it. She squeezed her portfolio tighter, her knuckles white. She shouldn't have heard that. This was a conversation that happened in shadows, not in a brightly lit elevator in Seoul's most prestigious office tower. The elevator chimed, signaling the 40th floor. Her floor. Relief was a sharp, sweet pang in her chest. The doors slid open. She took a step forward, but a solid wall of muscle blocked her way. One of the suited men had moved, his position casual, but utterly impassable. Aaliyah froze, her gaze darting from the man in front of her to the reflection of the man in the back, visible in the polished steel doors. He was watching her. His dark eyes held hers in the reflection, and she saw a flicker of something new. Not calculation. Annoyance. She was a loose thread in a perfectly woven tapestry. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "This is my floor." The man didn't move. The deep voice came from behind her again, closer this time. The scent of expensive cologne, something with notes of sandalwood and smoke, drifted over her. I don't think it is. The doors slid shut, sealing her in with them. The elevator began to ascend again, past the 40th floor, past the executive suites, heading for the private penthouse levels. Aaliyah's carefully constructed world, the world of deadlines and spreadsheets and office coffee, had just evaporated. She was no longer a secretary running late. She was a witness. And the man with the scar in his eyebrow had just decided she was his problem to solve. The penthouse was a cathedral of glass and steel, offering a panoramic view of Seoul that should have been breathtaking. Instead, it felt like the edge of the world. The decor was brutally minimalist: black leather, chrome, polished concrete floors. There was no art, no photographs, nothing personal. It was a space designed for transactions, not for living. Two of the men, the enforcers, flanked the door she'd been escorted through. The third stood near the window, a silent sentinel. And Kwon Jin-woo, the man whose name she'd learned from a hissed conversation in the hallway, sat behind a massive black desk, observing her. He hadn't said a word since they'd left the elevator. He just watched, his stillness more unnerving than any threat. Aaliyah stood in the center of the room, her portfolio still clutched to her chest like a shield. Her initial panic had subsided, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. Screaming would do nothing. Pleading would be a mistake. These men dealt in power, and she had none. All she had was her composure. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice even. He leaned forward slightly, placing his hands flat on the desk. They were elegant, lethal hands. "I want to know what you heard. I heard you tell someone to make sure a family understands something." It was vague. Corporate jargon. I assumed. She met his gaze directly, holding it. A lie, but a plausible one. Show no fear. Show no knowledge. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're a terrible liar, Ms." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "My name is Aaliyah, and my boss is expecting these files." She gestured with the portfolio. "He'll send security if I don't arrive." Another lie. Her boss, Mr. Henderson, was a timid man who would likely assume she'd quit without notice before he'd ever confront anyone. "Your boss has already been informed that you were called away for a family emergency," Jin-woo said smoothly. "Your personal effects will be delivered to your apartment this evening. You've been very generously compensated for your abrupt resignation." The floor dropped out from under her. He had erased her. In the span of 30 minutes, he had plucked her from her life, severed her connections, and rewritten her reality. This wasn't just a conversation, it was a cage. "Why?" she asked, the single word feeling small in the cavernous room. "Because you are a complication," he said, rising from his chair. He moved with a predator's grace, circling the desk to stand before her. He was taller than she'd realized, his presence commanding the space around him. "And I eliminate complications." He reached out, not to touch her, but to take the portfolio from her grasp. His fingers brushed against hers, and the contact was like an electric shock. His skin was cool. He tossed the portfolio onto the desk without looking at it. Its contents were irrelevant. She was the content he was interested in. "You're an administrative assistant at a mid-level tech import company," he continued, his voice low. "You live alone in a small apartment in Itaewon. You have no family in Korea. You are, for all intents and purposes, invisible. A perfect witness, or a perfect victim." He was so close now she could see the fine texture of the wool in his suit, the way the scar tissue pulled his eyebrow into a permanent state of faint disapproval. "What do you want from me?" she repeated, her voice a little less steady this time. For now, silence. And stillness. He gestured to one of the leather sofas. "Seat. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't move unless told. We have business to attend to. When it is concluded, I will decide what to do with you." That was when the first explosion rocked the building. The floor shuddered, and the vast wall of glass trembled, a deep groan echoing through the steel frame. A car alarm began to shriek from the street far below. Jin-woo's men moved instantly, a blur of disciplined motion. Two drew weapons from inside their jackets, moving to flank the windows, peering down. The third spoke urgently into a device on his wrist. Jin-woo didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the window. His dark eyes were locked on Aaliyah, watching her reaction. She had instinctively dropped into a crouch, her heart hammering against her ribs. Rivals, Jin-woo said, the word laced with a cold fury. They're getting bold. Another explosion, closer this time, from somewhere within the building. The lights flickered and died, plunging the penthouse into the gray afternoon light filtering through the smoked glass. The emergency lights kicked in, casting long, eerie shadows. Gunfire erupted from the direction of the private elevator lobby. Sharp, brutal cracks that were nothing like what she'd heard in movies. This was real. This was happening. One of Jin-woo's men grunted and fell back from the doorway, a dark stain spreading across the front of his white shirt. The other two returned fire, using the heavy furniture as cover. The air filled with the smell of cordite and ozone. In the chaos, Aaliyah saw her chance. The service exit, a heavy steel door she'd noticed when they brought her in, was unguarded. Everyone was focused on the main entrance. She could make a run for it. Survival screamed at her to go.
Now.
She started to move, staying low, her body a coiled spring of terror and adrenaline. But as she glanced back, she saw Jin-woo. He was behind his desk, a sleek, black pistol in his hand, moving with an unhurried, deadly calm. He was firing in controlled bursts, his expression a mask of pure concentration. One of the attackers fell in the doorway. Then she saw it. A second attacker, slipping in from the side, hidden by the angle of the wall. He had a clear shot at Jin-woo, who was focused on the primary threat. Time seemed to slow down. Her escape was right there. Freedom. Her old life. All she had to do was run. But if she did, Jin-woo would die. The man who had kidnapped her, threatened her, erased her. He deserved it. But her body wouldn't move toward the door. Some stubborn, infuriating piece of her, the part that hated seeing an unfair fight, that believed in evening the odds, took over. "On your left," she screamed, her voice raw. As the second attacker turned his head toward her voice, a flicker of surprise on his face, Jin-woo reacted. He didn't look, didn't hesitate. He pivoted, a fluid, economical motion, and fired twice. The man crumpled to the ground. The firefight was over as quickly as it had begun. The silence that fell was heavier than the noise had been. It was filled with the metallic scent of blood and the soft groan of the damaged building. Jin-woo slowly lowered his weapon, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. His eyes found hers across the room. He stared at her, the mask of concentration gone, replaced by something she couldn't read. It was complex, layered, and for the first time it looked human. She was still crouched by the sofa, her escape route forgotten. She had made a choice. She had screamed a warning for her captor. She had saved the life of the most dangerous man she had ever met. And in his dark, unreadable eyes, she saw the unnerving truth. He knew it, too. That was the moment everything changed. The lines of captor and captive blurred, replaced by a shared, bloody survival. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. He didn't offer a hand, didn't say, "Thank you." He crouched in front of her, his presence blotting out the rest of the ruined penthouse. His gaze was intense, searching her face for something. Injury. Deceit. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray piece of debris from her hair. The touch was brief, almost impersonal, but it sent a tremor through her. "Why?" he asked, his voice a low rasp. Aaliyah swallowed, her throat dry. "I don't know." It was the truth. She didn't know why she'd chosen his life over her freedom. It wasn't a calculated decision. It was an instinct she couldn't explain, and that scared her more than the gunfire had. He continued to study her for a long moment, then his gaze hardened again, the brief flicker of vulnerability gone. He rose and turned away, issuing a string of sharp commands in Korean to his remaining man. The cold, untouchable boss was back, but Aaliyah had seen the crack in the armor. She couldn't unsee it. The aftermath was ruthlessly efficient. A cleanup crew arrived, men in dark coveralls who moved with a silent, practiced competence, removing the bodies and wiping away any trace of the violence. Within an hour, the penthouse was pristine again, save for the bullet holes peppering the wall near the entrance. Aaliyah was moved to a bedroom suite that was larger than her entire apartment. It was as impersonal as the rest of the penthouse, but the bed was soft and the ensuite bathroom was stocked with expensive, anonymous toiletries. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage. For 2 days, she saw no one but a stern-faced woman who brought her meals on a tray and collected the empty dishes in silence. She had no phone, no television, no access to the outside world. She spent the time pacing, her thoughts a tangled mess. She replayed the firefight, her own scream, the look in Jin Woo's eyes. She told herself it was survival instinct. A dead captor might lead to a dead witness. It was a logical, self-preserving act. But she knew, in the quiet moments staring at her reflection in the dark glass of the window, that it was a lie. On the 3rd day, the door opened, and he was there. He had changed from his suit into a simple black cashmere sweater and dark trousers. The casual clothes somehow made him seem more dangerous, less constrained by the uniform of his power. "They know who you are," he said, without preamble. Aaliyah's heart clenched. "Who?" "The men who attacked this building. They belong to the Shin clan." "My rivals." He walked over to the window, his back to her. "They've been to your apartment. They left a message." He turned, and in his hand, he held a small, framed photograph. It was the one from her nightstand. A picture of her and her older sister, laughing together at a summer barbecue back home. On the glass, a single, ugly crack ran right through her sister's face. A cold dread, sharp and absolute, washed over her. This was no longer just about her. They were reaching into her past, threatening the one person she loved most in the world. "She's in America," Aaliyah whispered, her voice trembling. "They can't get to her." "Don't be naive," Jin Woo said, his tone cutting. "Their reach is long. They did this to show me they could. To show me that you are a vulnerability." "My vulnerability?" He set the photograph down on the dresser, the sound of the frame on the wood unnaturally loud in the silent room. He looked at her, and for the second time, she saw that crack in his composure. This time, it looked like pain. A deep, old wound. "I had someone once," he said, his voice so low she had to strain to hear it. "Her name was Minjun. She was important. The Shins used her to get to me. They thought I would trade territory for her life. They miscalculated." His jaw tightened, a muscle flexing in his cheek. "I did not negotiate. And they killed her. It was a mistake I have never repeated." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and bleeding. He wasn't just telling her a story. He was telling her why she was still alive. He was telling her what she represented. A second chance. A mistake he refused to make again. "I'm not her," Aaliyah said softly. "I know." His eyes met hers, and the intensity in them was scorching. "Minjun was an innocent. You are not." It wasn't an insult. It was an observation. An acknowledgement of the choice she'd made in the firefight, of the steel she'd shown in his presence. He was seeing her, not as a victim or a complication, but as something else entirely. The danger had escalated. It was no longer about what she had overheard in an elevator. The Shin clan had made her a target. She was a pawn in their war against him, and her life, and the safety of her sister, were now inextricably tied to his. He had brought this danger to her door, but he was also the only one who could protect her from it. That night, she couldn't sleep. She found herself in the main living area, staring out at the glittering expanse of Seoul. The city lights felt a million miles away. "You should be resting." Jin Woo's voice came from the shadows. He was standing by the bar, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. "I can't," she admitted. "I keep seeing that picture." He walked over to stand beside her at the window. They stood in silence for a long time, two disparate souls bound by violence, looking out at a world that no longer felt safe. "They will not touch your sister," he said. It was not a reassurance. It was a vow. "I sent my best men to her. She is under my protection now. She will never know she was in danger." Relief and violation warred within her. He was invading her life, her family's life, but He was doing it to keep them safe from a threat he had created. The morality of it was a tangled knot she couldn't begin to unravel. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling inadequate. He turned to face her, his shoulder almost brushing hers. The proximity was electric. "Do not thank me. This is my debt to pay." "This isn't your debt. It's your war. You are part of it now," he stated simply. "When you shouted, you chose a side." "I chose to live," she countered, though the words felt weak even to her. "Did you?" He took a step closer, and her breath hitched. His dark eyes searched hers, demanding an honesty she wasn't ready to give. "I told myself that keeping you here was a tactical decision. To control a liability." He paused, the silence stretching taut between them. "I have been lying to myself." There it was. A confession, more intimate and dangerous than any declaration of love. It was an admission of weakness from a man who afforded none. Aaliyah's heart hammered against her ribs. She could feel the fragile barrier she'd kept around herself begin to crumble. "I told myself I was staying to survive," she heard herself say, the words a quiet echo of his own admission. "I don't think that's the whole truth anymore." He lifted his hand, his knuckles lightly grazing her cheek. The touch was feather-light, yet it branded her skin. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, a gesture of ownership, so profound it stole the air from her lungs. This was it, the point of no return. He was claiming her, not with words, but with a silent, deliberate touch that promised protection and possession in equal measure. And she, to her own shock and terror, did not pull away. She leaned into his touch, crossing a line she could never uncross. The next move came faster than either of them expected. Jinwoo captured one of the Shin clan's lieutenants, a man named Choi, who had personally overseen the intimidation at Aaliyah's apartment. He was brought to a sterile, soundproofed room in the sub-basement of the tower. It was a place of cold concrete and harsh fluorescent light, a place where Jinwoo's empire showed its brutal foundations. Jinwoo brought her there. He stood her by the door, not to terrorize her, but to show her, to test her. Choi was bound to a steel chair, his face a mask of defiant arrogance, though a tremor of fear danced in his eyes. "This is the man who cracked the photograph of your sister," Jinwoo said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He placed a clean, polished pistol on a metal table next to Choi. "He threatened your family. He tried to use you to wound me. In my world, such actions have consequences. But you are from a different world. So, I will give you the choice. What happens to him?" Aaliyah looked at Choi, at his sneering mouth and hateful eyes. The man represented everything she feared, a senseless violence that could reach across oceans and harm the people she loved. The woman she was a week ago, the secretary who organized spreadsheets and worried about coffee orders, would have pleaded for mercy. She would have argued for justice, for a system she no longer believed could touch men like these. But she wasn't that woman anymore. This world had changed her, forged something harder in her core. She looked from Choi's terrified face to Jinwoo's impassive one. He was giving her power, a terrible and intoxicating thing. He was asking her to step fully into his world. She met Jinwoo's gaze, and her voice, when it came, was clear and cold. "He tried to kill me. He threatened my sister. He showed us who he is." She took a breath. "Show him who you are." She had not asked for mercy. She had given permission. She had crossed a moral line she could never uncross, and in that moment, she saw a flicker of dark approval in Jinwoo's eyes. He had tested her, and she had not broken. She had adapted. He gave a sharp nod to his man, who stepped forward. Jinwoo led her from the room before she could hear the muffled sound that followed. He didn't shield her from the choice, only from its immediate, ugly consequence. The final confrontation was orchestrated by the head of the Shin clan himself, a cunning old wolf named Shin Tae-hwan. He proposed a truce, a meeting to end the bloodshed. The location was neutral territory, the abandoned wing of the National Museum after hours. Jinwoo knew it was a trap. Shin Tae-hwan would never surrender territory or power willingly. "You will stay here," Jinwoo commanded, shrugging on a jacket that concealed the holster at his shoulder. It's the safest place for you. No, Aaliyah said, her voice firm. He's using me as the reason for this truce. My absence would be an insult. He'd know you don't trust him, she paused. And you'll need another set of eyes. He studied her, his gaze weighing her resolve. He saw not fear, but a determined calm. He saw a partner, not a liability. He gave a single, sharp nod. The museum was a cavern of shadows and ghosts. Marble statues of ancient warriors watched them pass, their stone eyes cold and judgmental. Shin Tae-hwan was waiting in the grand rotunda, flanked by his own soldiers. He was an older man, but his eyes were sharp and predatory. "Kwon Jin-woo," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "And you brought the lovely complication." A bold move, his eyes slid to Aaliyah, slick and dismissive. They spoke in formalities, their words layered with threats and veiled insults. Aaliyah stood slightly behind Jin-woo, her senses on high alert. She wasn't listening to the words. She was watching. She watched Shin's men, their posture, the way their eyes darted toward the upper balconies. She remembered something Jin-woo had told her, a small detail about how the Shin clan operated. They prefer to strike from above. An old-fashioned, honorless tactic, in his view. As Jin-woo and Shin Tae-hwan reached a stalemate in their verbal sparring, Aaliyah saw it. A glint of light from the second-floor balcony, reflecting off something metallic. A rifle scope. At the same time, she noticed Shin Tae-hwan subtly shift his weight to his back foot, a classic duelist's prep step. He was bracing himself. The signal. She didn't have time to shout. Jin-woo was in the sniper's direct line of fire. Acting on pure instinct, she grabbed a heavy bronze vase from a nearby pedestal and hurled it with all her strength at a glass display case on the far side of the rotunda. The sound of shattering glass was explosive in the echoing hall. It was the perfect diversion. Every head, including the snipers, whipped toward the sound for a split second. That was all Jin-woo needed. In that instant he moved. He drew his weapon and fired, not at Shin Tae-hwan, but at the two bodyguards closest to him. The sniper on the balcony fired a moment later, the bullet screaming through the air where Jin-woo's head had been, shattering a marble bust behind him. The rotunda erupted into a symphony of chaos and gunfire. Aaliyah dropped to the floor, crawling behind a thick marble column. She had done it again. She hadn't been a passive victim, a pawn to be traded. She had acted. She had seen the threat and created the opening. She had saved him. The fight was brutal and short. Jin-woo moved through the violence like it was his native element, a dancer in a storm of bullets. When the silence fell, only he and his men were left standing. Shin Tae-hwan lay on the marble floor, his reign of terror finally over. Jin-woo walked over to her, his face grim, his weapon still held loosely at his side. He checked her for injuries with a sweep of his eyes, the concern in them raw and unguarded. "You are unharmed?" he asked, his voice tight. She nodded, her body trembling with adrenaline. He holstered his weapon and held out his hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet. He didn't let go. His thumb stroked the back of her hand, a small, possessive gesture in the midst of the carnage. The cost had been paid, in blood and bullets, on the cold museum floor. The threat was gone. He looked at her, and for the first time, there were no masks, no walls. There was only a man looking at the woman who had seen the very worst of him and had not only stayed but had fought beside him. "My world has always been a solitary one," he said, his voice low and rough, "built on loyalty and fear. I never expected this." He gestured vaguely at her, at them, at the impossible connection forged between them. He didn't have the words for love or affection. They were foreign to him. So he used the language he knew, the language of his empire. "Everything I have," he said, his dark eyes holding hers. "My territory, my name, my life. It is all yours, if you will have it." It was not a proposal. It was a transfer of power, a coronation. He was laying his entire world at her feet. Later, they stood on the balcony of the penthouse. The city lights of Seoul spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The air was cool and clean. The silence between them was no longer heavy with unspoken threats, but filled with a quiet, profound understanding. Her hand was in his grip firm and certain. This was her choice. She could have demanded he let her go, that he send her back to a life of quiet normalcy. But she knew she could never go back. She had seen too much, done too much. The woman she used to be was a ghost. She looked at his face, at the severe lines softened by the city lights, at the scar that no longer seemed like a flaw, but a part of the man she had chosen. This was a dangerous life, a world of shadows and violence. But it was also a world where she was seen, where she was valued, where she had power. She tightened her grip on his hand. She didn't say yes. She didn't need to. Her choice was in her touch, in the way she stood beside him. No longer a captive, but a queen surveying her new, perilous kingdom. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something far more real, and infinitely more dangerous. And it was hers.